Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay, so today I'm gonna do episode 3, which is entitled Charlie X. Also, I don't know if y'all remember, but I have this highlighter that I cannot use as a highlighter because, no, that wouldn't work. So, I'm gonna try to use it as eyeshadow and see how that works today. Okay, so it starts off, Kirk's talking. He's talking about how they are going to have an unusual package that they are picking up from a cargo ship, which happens to be a person. It is a 17-year-old boy who supposedly shipwrecked on this planet when he was 3. Oh, brows, prime already done. When he was 3 and has survived by himself this whole time, alone. So, Kirk is in the transporter room, which is where they go and they beam from ship to ship, or planet to ship, or wherever they're beaming from. And what beams on board is the captain of the cargo ship and his first officer and the 17-year-old boy. Okay, so when they get there, you know, the captain's like, hey, what's up? Do y'all need any supplies, anything like that? Now this kid Charlie goes and stands behind Captain Kirk while the captain and the first officer are in front of him. And they're just sitting there and they are not really saying anything. Like, you can tell they're extremely uncomfortable, but they're not actually saying anything. And it shows the face of the kid, and he like rolls his eyes into the back of his head, and then all of a sudden the captain and the first mate or whatever just start gushing all about Charlie and how wonderful he is, and he's amazing because he took care of himself, living on this world by himself, and all that good stuff, which is, okay, whatever. You know, I'll give it to you. It's an accomplishment. So they're all going all on about Charlie and how he's amazing. They wish they could take him with them. But he apparently has family on one of the colonies that Kirk is going by on his ship. So that's why they're bringing Charlie to him. Otherwise, they would love to keep him. Now, this whole time, you can tell that they are very uncomfortable. Okay, you can just tell by the look and the way they're talking that they are not comfortable. So, Kirk's like, well, do y'all need any supplies? Anything like that? And they're like, no, we're good. And then the Charlie kid interrupts them and he's like, are there other people on this ship? And the other captain's like, yeah, there's like over 400 people on this ship. It's like a city in space. And Kirk turns around to the kid and he's like, there's 428 people. And Charlie's just looking perplexed. And again, Captain Kirk turns back to the other captain and he's like, y'all sure y'all don't need medical supplies? You don't need nothing. Like, you're completely good. You don't need anything. And they're like, no, you know, we're good. And Charlie's like, all them people, they're like me. And he's like, that's exciting. And then he looks at the other captain and the first mate, and he's like, exciting, right? Like, like that's the right word. And they're like, oh yes, that's the right word. That's an excellent word. That's a great word. And he's like, oh, okay. So Kirk's again like, well, do y'all need any movies? Like, we have entertainment, you know, anything like that. And Charlie's like, Captain, I want to see the ship and all the people, like, right now. And he's like, you keep interrupting, and that's not right. Like, that's not okay. You shouldn't be doing that. And he's like, okay, sorry, you know, whatever. So he asked the other captain and the first mate one more time, you know, do you want any entertainment? And he's like, no, there's only 20 of us, you know, we're good. And Kirk's like, okay, well, this is the first that, you know, cargo ship out here has needed nothing. And the captain assures him, no, we're good. You know, he's ready to leave. Like, he's ready to get out of there. So Kirk's like, okay. Well, while Kirk is telling them by the yeoman, she is a blonde female, walks into the transporter room, and Charlie looks at her, and he's just looking at her like, what in the world? And Kirk tells them, you know, safe trip, blah, 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 you know, all that good stuff or whatever. And they leave. And Kirk goes to the yeoman, Janice, and he's like, can you show Charlie his quarters, his rooms, and take his medical records by over to McCoy, or who I call Bones. They kind of call him both, so. And she's like, yeah. She's like, okay, let's go. And this Charlie kid's just looking at her. And he takes like a step to follow her. Then he stops and he's looking at her. And he looks back at Kirk. And then he looks at her again. And he's like, are you a girl? Like, he's asking her if she's a girl. And you can tell she's kind of like, what? Like, what? And why is he asking me if I'm a girl? Kind of thing. And she looks at Kirk like, you know, what do I say? And so Charlie looks at Kirk and he's like, is she a girl? And Kirk's like, she's a girl. And she's like, go on. You know, she grabs him off, his arm, takes him along. Well, then you see him, and he's with the doctor, and he's like doing some little workout machine. You know, the doc's basically just checking him out, making sure he's healthy. You know, that kind of stuff. So, doc's checking him out, and finds out that, you know, he learned how to talk from the ship, and because the computer was still working, and it would talk to him, and he could talk back to it, kind of thing. That's how he learned how to talk, according to him. And the doc, McCoy asked him, well, what about food? Because he knows that the food wouldn't have lasted for like 14 years. And, you know, Charlie's telling him, no, it didn't last the whole time. But, you know, I just found other things to eat. Berry, you know, stuff like that. And McCoy's, you know, he's fascinated. I mean, I can see why he's fascinated, while it would be interesting. And so McCoy checks him out, gives him a clean bill of health, and they're going to leave, and Charlie asks McCoy, do you like me? And he's like, you know, why not? I mean, like, you know, I don't know you enough to not like you, kind of thing, you know. And he's like, well, that's good. The people on the other ship, they didn't like me. And he's like, but I want people to like me. He's like, I tried. They just, you know, they didn't like me. And McCoy's like, every 17-year-old wants people to like them, which is true. That's just part of life, you know. Especially when you're 17. Well, really, I think that's more 15, 16, but, you know, whatever. And McCoy's like, you know, everybody wants you, you know. That's what 17-year-olds do. He's like, okay, I'm going to show you your quarters. Which I don't understand why he says that, because the captain tells the yeoman to show him his quarters. So he should have already been there. But whatever. So we're presuming that he showed him his quarters, okay? You see Charlie walking around the ship. He's just checking things out, seeing what people are doing. And he sees one interaction where this guy's like lowering this, it's like a pole is actually what it is. And he's lowering it. I mean, we're presuming to somebody underneath him. We don't actually know that. We're just presuming that's what's happening. And then there's another scene that you see where Charlie is watching two people that just got done fixing something. We don't know what they're fixing. And one guy's handing another guy some equipment. And he's like, I'll put this up and meet you in, you know, rec room, whatever. And the guy's like, cool, thanks, friend. And he slaps the guy on the butt. Well, Charlie sees this. You know, I mean, he's literally just walking around, seeing, like, you know, their interactions, how people are treating each other. Because, you know, this is completely new to him. He doesn't know how you're, you know, how you're supposed to interact with each other and stuff like that. So then you see Janice coming out of what we're going to presume is her room. Or her quarters, whatever you want to call it. And she walks past Charlie, and Charlie sees her. And she walks around the corner, and then Charlie walks around the corner behind her, and he's like, hey, I got you a present. And she's like, oh, thank you. And he hands her this green bottle. Well, a bottle would look like green liquid. I'm gonna assume it's supposed to be like perfume. Like, they don't tell you what it is, but I'm assuming it's supposed to be like some kind of perfume. And she's like, thank you, but I gotta go. I'm fixing to be on duty. And he's like, well, do you like it? And she looks at it, and she's like, yeah. And then she, like, really looks at it, and she's like, this is my favorite. Where did you get this? They don't have it in the ship stores. And he's like, well, it's a present. She's like, well, yeah, like, she gets it as a present, but she's like, you know, where'd you get this? And then she's like, I really gotta go. I'm running late. That kind of thing. And he's like, no, I want you to sit here and talk to me. And she's like, look, I get off duty at this time. Meet me in this particular recreation room. Which satisfies him for the now. And he's like, okay, friend. And then he slaps her on the bottom. And she's like, Charlie. And he's like, what? I'm sorry. I thought it was, because, you know, he Which I get that. He had seen them other people do it, so he didn't know that it was wrong. He, you know, just thought it was okay interaction, so he didn't think anything about it. And she's like, okay. She's like, it's okay, but I want you to either go see Dr. McCoy or the captain, and they're going to explain it to you, like why it's not okay. So he agrees to go, and she's like, okay. So then it goes to the bridge, and McCoy, Spock, and Kirk are up there. And McCoy and Spock are arguing, or debating, because Spock's like, look, there's no way this kid was 3 and took care of himself for 14 years without any help. Like, he ain't buying it. They trying to sell it, he ain't buying it. And of course McCoy's like, you know, he said he learned off of this and blah 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 blah, and tell him what the kid told him and all that stuff. And Spock's like, the fact that he is even alive proves that there are people down there. You know, that there is some form of life down there. Let's put some form of life. And Kurt jumps in the conversation. He's like, look, the fact is, the boy's here. The kid's here, okay? So he's like, you know, Bones is setting up history lessons for him to learn about, you know, where he came from and his people. And I mean, that's understandable. And McCoy's like, yeah, but you know, he needs a good role model, you know. A good father figure. And Kirk's like, well, you know, I'm sure that you will do a good job. And McCoy's like, crap. But Kirk ain't having no part in that. He ain't trying to have to do all that. So you see Spock. This is later, like the next scene or whatever. And they are in a rec room, and Spock is playing. It's not really a harp, but it kind of looks like a shrunk harp that, like, he just sits on his shoulder and he like plays it like this kind of thing. I don't know what it's called. Don't ask me because I don't know. I'm sure it's named somewhere. I just don't know. So he's playing that, and Uhura and Janice are in there, and they're playing cards. And he starts playing, and Uhura starts humming, and you can tell this has happened more than once, because she's humming away, and he stops playing, and he's looking at her, and she's like, sorry, I did it again. And he looks kind of annoyed at first, but then I guess he gets over it, because he smiles at her, and he starts playing again, and she starts singing, and she's singing about Spock. And, you know, everybody's laughing. They're just all having a good time. Charlie comes in the middle. Well, I don't want to say the middle. Probably about the end of her singing about Spock. And he's trying to get Janice's attention. And, you know, she acknowledges him. And she's like, you know, just hold on, you know, because she's listening to her and stuff. So he's waiting. And then when the horror's done, everybody starts clapping, and he claps because he sees everybody clapping, and Spock keeps playing, and Janice is like, another one. So she starts singing about Charlie. And at first he's kind of okay with it, but then it like makes him uncomfortable, so he's like, So he sits down and he wants to show Janice a card trick, but she's watching Ohura, so you know, he's trying to be patient, and finally his patience runs out, and he rolls his eyes to the back of his head, and all of a sudden, Ohura is not singing, like her nothing's coming out of her voice, nothing's coming out. So, and it's not for very long. I mean, it's maybe like 3 or 4 seconds. So he gets Janice's attention, and he does a card trick. He pulls out 3 cards, and he's, I think it was like I want to say it was like a king, queen. Yeah, I want to say it's like the king, queen, jack of spades, or, not spades, clubs. And he shows them to her, and then he flips them over, and he has her flip them back over, and there's pictures of her on each card. And she's like, oh my God, how did you do that? Because she's amazed, which I think I would be amazed and a little weirded out, but whatever. So he's telling her that he knows lots of card tricks, and he flips the cards back over and then picks them up and then shows them out of his hand, and they're back to the, you know, the king, queen, and jack. And she's like, oh, that's cool. He's like, I know lots of card tricks. Well, by this time, people are gathered around them, and he does another one. He pulls out like all 4 aces, picks up 1 ace, throws it away, like behind him, like, and then you see Janice flinch, and then she reaches into her little uniform and she pulls out the card. And everybody cheers and all that stuff, and he's eating it up. So then the next scene it switches, and you see the captain, and he's talking to somebody. You don't see who he's talking to, you just can hear him talking to somebody. And he's like talking to him about dinner or something to that degree. And Charlie walks up to him, and he's like, I need to talk to you, you know. He tells him what happened with Janice, and that she's, you know, told him to come talk to him. And Kirk's like, she told you to come talk to me? And he's like, yeah. So Kirk's trying to explain why he can't go around just slapping women on the butt, right? But he does not do a very good job. He doesn't actually say it at all. He's trying to tell him, but it's just not happening. He can't do it. Because he even asked him, he's like, you understand me? He's like, oh, I don't know. Because Kirk didn't make any sense, so it's no wonder he didn't know if he understood. I mean, I knew what he was trying to tell him, and I didn't understand, you know? So about that time, the intercom goes off, and they're asking for the captain. They're saying they're getting a message from the cargo ship that dropped off Charlie. He's like, okay, so he's going to head back up to the bridge and hear what that captain has to say. And Charlie asks if he can go with him. And Kirk's like, no, you know, it's okay. And he's like, I won't be any bother. So he goes ahead and he goes up there with Kirk. and they're trying to get a hold of him. The captain is, and he's like, I need to warn you about, and then the transmission cuts off, right? And he's like, well, get him back. What do you know, what's he trying to warn me about? And they can't get it back, and Kirk's like, okay, figure out what happened. Like, why all of a sudden we just can't talk to them? And so Spock's trying to get him back, and he's like, okay, you know, this is where they should have been. He's using his scanners and all that good stuff to, you know, figure out what happened. And he's like, well, I've got debris. And Kirk's like, okay, what about the ship? And he's like, Spock's like, the debris I'm picking up is the ship. And Charlie makes this noise, and they all look at him, and he looks, he knows something. You can tell by the look on his face. He knows something. And they're all just kind of like, okay. That's kind of weird. So, it switches to, you're back to Kirk and Spock, but they're like in a recreation room and they're playing chess. And chess in Star Trek is not like just one flat board. It has like 3 separate little tiers that make up the whole board. And they're playing, and Spock's like, okay, you know, he can tell that Kirk is like, he's agitated. He wants to know what happened to that ship. And Spock's like, you know, he is personally more interested in the boy. He's like, he knew something. He didn't know what he knew, but he read the look on his face, like us, the audience, read the look on his face. He knew something he wasn't saying. And Kirk's like, no, you know, he's just a boy, you know. And, which he should listen to Spock in these matters. He really should. And Charlie walks in while they're playing the game. And Kirk calls him over there. So Charlie goes over there. And he asked him if he ever played chess. And he said that he had seen the guys on the cargo ship play it. So, you know, he felt he knew how to play it. And Kirk's like, okay, well, I'm going to leave you with our chess champion. Which would be Spock. And Kirk leaves, and they start the game, and Spock makes a move, and then Charlie makes a move, and Spock's like, no, you messed up, that's not the right move. And Charlie's like, yes it is. Like, he's real, like, automatically defensive and just, So, Spock makes his move and says, checkmate. So it basically took him 2 moves to win the game. Needless to say, Charlie is not a happy camper about this, but it is what it is. So, Spock gets up and he leaves, and Charlie's mad. He's in there by himself. So, after Spock leaves, Charlie rolls his eyes into the back of his head, and the chess pieces, it like shows the chess pieces after he does that, and they're like all melted. Okay? So, after this, you see Charlie or he walks out, and you see Charlie, see Janice, and there's a younger crew member, like somebody closer at his age. And she's like, hey, you know, this is so-and-so. I thought you might want to hang out with somebody your own age. And he's like, huh, basically, and brushes her off. He's like, hey, I want to talk to you, Janice, alone. And she's like, you know, and the younger girl's just kind of like, oh, rude much? I mean, she doesn't say that, but that's what she's saying, you know. So she leaves, and she's like, you can't act like that. That's just like, you know, that's not okay for you to act like that. It's rude. You know, you're not alone anymore. You have to live with these people. You know, he's just basically, I mean, she's basically telling him, dude, you can't do crap like that. Like, you cannot treat people like that. It's not okay. And he's like, well, I'm sorry. Da, da, da. He's like, but I only want to talk to you. And he doesn't care what the other girls look like because they're not her. And, you know, I mean, he got himself a good old crush going on. And she recognizes this, but she's, you know, she's just mad because of the way that he treated that other girl. So the next scene, you see her, and she's up on the bridge, and she's talking to Kirk, and she's like, look, something's got to be done. And he's like, I talked to him about the swatting thing. She's like, no, it's not really that. She's like, look, you know, I'm his first crush, his first love, all that kind of stuff. She's like, but, I mean, if something's not done, at the end of the day, I'm going to have to hurt him. Not physically, like, hurt him, like, tell him he can't be around and, you know, stuff like that. Because she's, like, older than him. Like, they're not anywhere, like, close in age or anything like that. And, of course, Kirk's like, okay, I'll handle it. So, Charlie comes to Kirk's room because Kirk calls him there or whatever. So, he comes to the room, and Kirk asks Charlie, you know, do you know what happened to these chess pieces? He's showing him the ones that were melted. And Charlie's like, no. Which, of course, he's going to say no. What's he going to say? I mean, come on. And Charlie's like, is that it? And he's like, no. He's, you know, he's like, okay, we got to talk about Janice. And he's like, well, she could love me. And no matter what I do, it's either wrong. I do what other people do. I don't know who I am. You know, that kind of stuff. And Kirk's like, basically like, dude, everybody goes through that. That's life. Like, that's just how that works. He's like, but, you know, she's too old for you. Like, that's just not gonna happen. And he's like, but she could. And he's like, no, not gonna happen. He's like, there's the age thing and just other things that's not gonna happen. And of course, that's not what Charlie wants to hear. But that doesn't exactly make it untrue, if you get my drift. And, you know, Charlie's not happy about it, and Kirk's like, okay. So he's got to figure out something else to do. So it goes to the next scene, and they are in, like, a workout room, and he's teaching him how to fall and not hurt himself. He's trying to teach him, like, if somebody flips you over, what you do, you know, that kind of thing. And Charlie's like, I don't want to do that. And he's like, you said you were going to teach me how to fight. And he's like, well, I can't teach you how to fight unless you know how to, you know, take care of yourself, kind of thing. And Charlie still doesn't want to do it. So there's another guy in there, and Kurt calls him over there. I think his name's Sam. I want to say his name's Sam. He's like, you know, Sam, come here, help me out. So they do a little scuffle thing, and Kirk throws the Sam guy, or maybe the other way around. I don't know. One of them throws one of them, okay? And they do the little roll thing that he had been trying to show Charlie. And Captain's like, alright, come on, let's try it. So him and Charlie do a little scuffle thing and, you know, trying to toss each other and all that good stuff. And then Kirk tosses Charlie. And the Sam guy was sitting there watching, and he starts laughing. And Charlie's like, don't laugh at me. And then he rolls his eyes into the back of his head, and the Sam guy just disappears, like he's no longer there. And Kirk's like, what just happened? Like, hello. And he's like, where is he at? And he's like, he's gone. He made me do it. He shouldn't have been laughing at me. That's not nice. And Kirk's like, okay. So he calls for security. And Charlie's like, I'm not going to let them hurt me. And he's like, they're not going to hurt you, but you're going to your quarters. Like, that's where you're going there and you're staying there. And the security officers walk in and they try to walk up to him, and Charlie pushes him over with his hand. He doesn't actually touch them. He's just like, and they go flying. And one of the security guys reaches for his phaser, and Charlie does the eye roll thing, and the phaser disappears. And Kirk's like, okay. So he steps up to Charlie. And you know, back in the day, they like widened their eyes like when it's an intense moment. So it's an intense moment, right? And he's like, you're gonna go to your quarters, even if I have to pick you up and take you there. Okay, Kirk ain't backing down. He don't care. That ain't how he works, okay? So Charlie's like, I won't let you. And he's like, well, that's your call to make. So Charlie gives in. You can see him deflate. And he's like, I'm not going to let them hurt me. And he's like, they're not going to hurt you. Like, that's not what's going on here. I mean, you know, he probably needs to be hurt, but that's not what's going to go down. So when they're walking out, a Horton comes out over the radio, and she's like, hey, I just want to let you know that all the phasers on the ship are gone. So he didn't just take the one security guys. He took them all. Every one of them on the ship. So Kirk and Spock and McCoy, they all meet up in the briefing room. And Spock is like, he had something to do with that cargo ship. And they're all discussing it, and they're like, you know, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle him? You know, that kind of stuff. And while they're trying to decide that, Charlie walks in. And, I mean, he's just, you know, cheesing it up. Everything's good. Doesn't matter that he just made somebody disappear. You know what I mean? Everything's good in his world. So when he gets in there, Kirk's like, did you have anything to do with that cargo ship? And he's like, yes. And then he goes into some techno-babble that I don't know what that means saying. And then he says, it was going to blow up anyway. Like, it didn't matter that he just killed all them people. You know, it was going to blow up anyway. So, you know, whatever. So, they're not very happy with Charlie at this point. So they go back up to the bridge. And Kirk's like, there ain't no way for taking him to that colony of people. Not happening. So they're trying to change course so that they don't go to Colony. And Charlie shows up and he's like, you know, what are you doing? I need to get to that colony. That's where I want to go. And Kirk's not having that. And he for sure ain't having some little kid tell him what he's going to do. That ain't going to happen. Well, Spock starts trying to talk to him, to Kirk. And Charlie does his little eye roll thingy. And Spock starts spewing out poetry when he's talking. And Spock's like, you're gonna leave my people alone. You're not gonna mess with them. And you can tell Charlie's having a battle. Like, do I do what he says? Do I do what I want? You know, because to him it's funny. Like, he doesn't see anything wrong with treating people like that. You know, he even tells them, I can make him do this and I can make him do that. Don't you think that's funny? And Kirk's like, no, I don't. And he basically gives in. And Spock's back to talking normal and all that good stuff. And they're like, look, eventually he's not going to back down. We got to figure out what we are going to do. And Kirk's like, I know. Like, he knows that there's going to reach a point where he's going to tell Charlie to do something. And Charlie's going to be like, no. Sorry, I'm doing what I want. So it goes to Janice's room. And she's in her room. And Charlie walks in the door and he has a flower. And it's pink. And he's like, isn't pink your favorite? And she's like, you need to knock before you come in to doors. And he's like, well, don't lock me out again. And she's like, I'll do what I want. Well, I think she says, I'll do what I please. Or I'll do whatever, whenever, whatever. Anyways, basically she's telling me I'm going to do what I want. I don't care what you say. And he's like, you know, I love you. All that good stuff. Well, while they're having this conversation, she backs up and she clicks on her little intercom thing so they can hear her on the bridge. And she's telling Charlie, get out. I can't make it any clearer. Get out of here. So, of course, Spock and Kirk take off because, you know, who knows what he's going to do to her. So, they come in the room, and, of course, the first thing they do is go to Charlie, and he, you know, whips them back up against the wall. And Janice slaps Charlie, and he gets mad and looks at her and rolls his eyes, and she gone. She disappears too. And Charlie, this kid, he's like, she made me do it. Why was she acting like that? Why was she so mean? She was not nice. And he turns to Kirk and he's like, we're going to go here and I'm going to be in control of this ship. But this isn't like the cargo ship. I'm going to need you to help me and you're going to help me. And you can tell that Kirk's looks and be like, I ain't doing nothing you say. But Charlie looks at him and Kirk starts, you know, he's in pain and he's doubled over and stuff like that. And he's like, you know, you're going to do what I say. He's like, or I'm going to make a lot of people disappear. So finally Kirk's like, okay, and he goes to get up and he goes to get Spock up, and Spock informs him that he cannot get up because both of his legs are broken from Charlie throwing him. And Spock's like, you better fix it because, you know, and Charlie's like, why? And he's like, you need me to run the ship and I need him. Like, I can't do it all on my own, dude. So Charlie fixes Spock's legs, you know, with his little And they go back up to the bridge and they're like, okay. Charlie's like, okay. Everything's back on course, the way we need to be going, where we need to be going, blah, 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 blah. So, of course, Kirk's like, okay, we have got to figure something out. Like, we've got to. So, he notices, he's like, has anybody disappeared since Charlie took over the ship? And they're like, no. Why? And Kirk's like, okay, I think he's overtaxed. Like, he's out of power having to keep the ship going and all that. So Kirk doesn't think he can hurt people because he's too busy concentrated on the ship running the ship. He's like, we're going to turn on all the lights. We're going to turn on everything we can think of. So they get, that's their plan. And Charlie comes back up there and, Kirk basically confronts him. He's like, I know you're using too much power. I know that you can't, defend yourself and keep running the ship kind of thing. And of course, Charlie's like, yes, I can. I can do whatever I want. Nah. So Kirk goes after him, and for like a second, Charlie hurts him. Well, then McCoy and Spock start going to panels and turning on all kinds of crap, and eventually Kirk stops hurting because Charlie can't handle it. So once they get him to back off, Uhura is like, there is something out there. Like, there's a ship approaching, but there's no ship. Something is there. And when the audience sees it, it's like this green mist kind of stuff, okay? And it comes onto the ship, and this green mist forms into a face. And he's like, we're sorry. We didn't know the boy had left. We can't fix anything that he did with the cargo ship or anything like that. And then Janice appears back on the bridge, and he's like, all your people are back. Everything, your ship is in your control, Charlie needs to come with us. And of course Charlie's like, no, I don't want to go. I'll never do it again. I promise. And Kirk's like, well, he really does kind of need to be with his own people and, stuff like that. And the guy's like, that it's not going to work. He's like, he's not going to stop. He's never going to stop using his powers. So either he's going to hurt everybody or they're going to have to hurt him to stop him. So either way, it ain't ending well. And Charlie's like, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And he's like, they can't feel, you can't touch them because they're basically like a form of energy. They don't have bodies. But they gave Charlie these powers so that he could survive. So he did not survive on his own. He had help. But they gave him these powers so he could survive. So they can't just take him away. And he's freaking out. He's like, they can't feel, they can't love, they can't touch, And, he's screaming that he doesn't want to go. And, he's all like, no. And it all echoes out. And, then he disappears off the bridge. Charlie does. And, of course, Janice is crying. And Captain Kirk is like, it's okay. That kind of thing. And then sail off in the stars to their next adventure. Okay, I'm so glad we got through that. Like I told y'all, this is not one of my favorite episodes. This is the third time I've had to film this because something kept happening. So, I'm relieved that y'all know this story. Okay, I'm very relieved. But I will go on to the fourth episode, which is one that I actually really like, so that's cool. And remember, makeup or not, you're beautiful.